I got to say a couple things because I can't ever get into the message before we chat a little bit. I think it's awesome that Jean knows that 260 kids came to her house, came to the Milliken house. That's awesome. When she said that the first hour, I'm like, that's a lot of kids. And the second hour, I'm like, she must have counted those kids. I feel like, on the other hand, I actually visited 260 houses with my kids the other night. That was rough. And the pillowcase full of candy. And Kara was gone yesterday, so I put them to bed Friday night at like midnight. And Sophie, who's 7, she talks all the time. She wouldn't talk to me. I said, "Good night, sweetie." She's like, "Mm-hmm." I'm like, "What's up?" You okay? And I got a little closer. I'm like, "You have a Tootsie Roll in your mouth." She's like, "How did you know?" And like, it's just you're oozing Tootsie Roll out of your little self. And then it went on all day yesterday. They were just sneaking candy. "What are you doing?" Nothing, Dad. Liars. Yeah, they lied. Straight up. Dead on. So I love it. No, I don't. That's not true. I don't love it when we change the time this way. I love it for the hour that it gives us. I don't love it for the fact that today is just it fakes us out. You wake up and it's sunny and you think, oh, it's sunny earlier? That's going to change in like 5 minutes and it'll be dark dark later in the morning and earlier at night and it's depressing, right? But then Starbucks lifted my spirits because they started with the red cups already in November and Christmas is on its way. Mark, Pompey, wherever you are, start thinking about where you're going to get your gifts before the 23rd. Hey, we've been talking about, you know what? One more thing. I had lunch with a person from Grace on Friday, and this is a first for me. We're sitting there and we're chatting, and he goes, "You know what I hear from people is that they like you because you're short." And I go, I'm thinking, I'm not easily offended, but I'm like 5'9" when I wear my heels, man, so I'm not like jockey status here, but you're pushing it. And I said, "I'm short." And he goes, "Yeah, you're like 30 minutes, man. They love it that you're like 30 minutes. And I said, "Well, that's easy, man. I have to drive to Woodinville. It's like an hour away to get home for the Seahawks. I'm not going to go over. But I will tell you that I have a bank, and in the bank there's a reserve. I've reserved many minutes for when I drop a 50-minute talk on you guys. There will be much grace." All right, so we're continuing our Defining Moments series this morning. We've been looking at the defining moments of people throughout Scripture, and we've been kind of heavy in the Old Testament. We're going to be back in the Old Testament today, looking at the defining moment, really defining moments, 2 moments, in the life of the prophet Elijah. 1 Kings 18, and stick your finger in 1 Kings 19 if you've got your Bible. So in 1 Kings 18, there's a guy on the throne in Israel called Ahab. And Ahab was not a godly king. To say that he was not a godly king is a massive understatement, because Ahab was the kind of guy that did his own thing, his own way. He marched to the beat of his own drum. And as a result, he's arguably the most evil king to ever sit on the throne in Israel. And a significant contributing factor to the ungodly reign of Ahab was his not-so-lovely bride, Jezebel. So remember a couple weeks ago we talked about Judas, and I asked you, how many of you know anybody in your life history who's named their son Judas? And nobody raised their hand. Jezebel, same thing. Anybody know anybody that's ever named their daughter Jezebel? No, because Judas and Jezebel and Adolf, these are names that are not even on the endangered named list. They are on the extinct named list. People are not naming their little girls Jezebel anymore, and there's a reason for it, and it's this woman. In fact, I don't think our country has really heard the name Jezebel used since that Bette Davis movie back in the 50s or 60s. If anybody know what I'm talking about? See? Yeah, a couple of you. I told you, gift of useless information. You want to know something useless? I'm your guy. So, in a time when arranged marriages in ancient history were the way to go, Ahab breaks tradition and he marries this Phoenician princess, Jezebel. And Jezebel is a polytheistic pagan. She was an equal opportunity God worshiper, as long as it fit into what she wanted and needed. And her favorite gods were the gods of Baal and Asherah. And with Ahab's consent and with Ahab's complicity, Jezebel is determined to have the gods Baal and Asherah rule in Israel, and she is determined to wipe out all evidence and all traces of the God of Israel, the Hebrew God, in that country. And as part of her strategy, what Jezebel wanted to do and what her plan was and what she did was she pursued killing all of God's prophets in Israel. And so as a result, in order to survive, all the prophets had to run literally for the hills. They had to live in caves, and they survived on nothing more than bread and water. So this wasn't a great time to be a person of God. It certainly wasn't a great time to be a prophet. 1 Kings 16 says this about Ahab. Ahab, verses 30, 32, and 33. Ahab did what was evil in the Lord's sight, even more than any of the kings before him. First he built an altar for Baal in Samaria. Then he set up an Asherah pole. He did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than any of the other kings of Israel before him. So that's not how you want your legacy to be left in the Bible, in a historical document for all of history to read about you. That you did more to arouse the anger of the Lord than any of the kings before you. Not a good dude. Because he wasn't a good dude, in 1 Kings 17, Elijah comes and explains the consequences of being an ungodly, evil king who aroused the anger of the Lord more than any of the kings before him were going to be. Now Elijah, 1 Kings 17, verse 1, who was from Tishbe in Gilead, told King Ahab, "As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, the God whom I worship and serve, there will be no dew or rain during the next few years unless I give the word." So there's going to be drought. The job of the prophet was not a glamorous gig. It was not a desirable job. If you were a prophet like Elijah, it was your job to tell kings. It was your job to tell the masses of people what God had to say. And very often, if you look through the Old Testament, it's usually bad news. Very rarely is it good news, because you're talking to people who are flawed and broken and sinful, who mess up all the time. And so very often it was, unless you change your ways, this is what God's going to do, and it's going to be bad. And this was a taxing job for Elijah, and we'll see how taxing it was here as we go through. But here he goes to the king and points a finger in the king's chest, and then he goes into hiding. After doing that, goes back into the mountains, goes back into the caves, and lives on bread and water. Then he returns a couple of years later. 1 Kings 18, 1 and 2. After many months passed, in the third year of the drought, the Lord said to Elijah, "Go and present yourself to King Ahab. Tell him that I will soon send rain." But that's not all that God's going to do. So Elijah went to appear before Ahab, and Ahab couldn't wait for Elijah to show back up. Ahab goes out to meet him, verse 16 says. "So it is you, is it, Israel's troublemaker? The one who came and said we're going to have drought. Now we haven't had drought or dew for, nearly 3 years." Elijah, acting on God's behalf, has severe words for Ahab once again. He says, "I have made no trouble for Israel," Elijah said. "You and your family are the troublemakers." Dangerous words to say to a king. "You and your family are the troublemakers, for you have refused to obey the commands of the Lord and have worshipped the images of Baal instead." Elijah is really giving it to King Ahab here, but Elijah he's just not all talk here. Elijah's brought an A game to back up the things he's saying to King Ahab. So Elijah throws down a challenge here in the next couple of verses. He says, "Okay, Ahab, here's how it's going to be. My God against you and Jezebel and all your gods." That's what we're going to do. We're going to have a showdown of the gods. So Elijah says in verse 19, "Now bring all the people of Israel to Mount Carmel, with all 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who are supported by Jezebel." So Ahab summoned all the people and the prophets to Mount Carmel. Then Elijah stood in front of them and said, "How long are you going to waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him." But the people were completely silent, which is to say the people were indifferent. People were sitting back like this saying, "We'll see. We'll see. We're just going to choose what's working for us. We're just going to choose what's best for us right now. We'll see." There's going to be a challenge of the gods here that the people they're going to respond a little different than that shortly. So the nation of Israel gathers on Mount Carmel. I don't know if it was the entire nation, but it was definitely hundreds, if not thousands. It was enough people to spread the word like wildfire in the event something significant went down, and something significant was about to go down here. So Elijah challenges God's people, the people of Israel. How long are you going to waver back and forth? When are you going to choose a God? Are you going to continue to waffle back and forth when it's convenient for you? And pretty much they said, yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do. That's what they had been doing. They were wavering and waffling between whichever God, whichever idea was most convenient for them. And We see ourselves, I think, in these people. I think we'll see ourselves in Elijah too, but we see ourselves in these people. We may not worship pagan gods. We're a little more subtle than that. At least I'm certainly more subtle than that. We talked a little bit about this last week. When we need something from God, then we tend to be on our best behavior, right? Tend to ask God for the things that we need. We tend to trust Him and do our very best and act our very best. But when we have the things that we need, when we feel like we're secure in our stuff, we often put our trust in ourselves. We often put our trust in the things that we have, however fleeting those things may be. But that doesn't work with God. It didn't work with God for the people in Elijah's situation here, and it doesn't work with God with us. God doesn't want part of us. He doesn't want half of us. He doesn't want some of us some of the time. He wants all of us all of the time. He wants us to experience all that He is, and He wants to give us, He wants to experience all that we are. He wants to have all that we are. God doesn't want to be a part-time God, and He certainly doesn't want to be the Santa Claus God that just gets the list of things that we need from Him from time to time. He wants to be all in with us, and He wants us to be all in with Him. Jesus in Matthew 12, verse 30 says, "He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters," or "he who does not gather with me works against me." And what I look at that in my own life, if I'm not all in with God, which is more often than I would like to admit, then I'm actually working against God, and that's not where I want to be. It's not where any of us want to be. So Elijah's challenging the people there not to be in that place. That's where they were. In this confrontation, in this showdown of the gods, Elijah is definitely the underdog. He's chosen Mount Carmel as the epicenter for this battle of the gods. It's significant because Mount Carmel was known now, with Ahab and Jezebel on the thrones, to be the dwelling place of the god Baal. Ironically now, 3 years in or so into this drought, the god Baal hasn't really done his job, because Baal was the rain god. And there's been a drought for 3 years, and Baal hasn't come through. So Elijah decides we're going to have this showdown on Mount Carmel, and we're going to bring all the pagan prophets, all 850 of these pagan prophets, against one measly prophet of God who's malnourished and exhausted. So the pagans now have this ridiculous numerical advantage, but they also have home field advantage. They're on Baal's home turf. They're on his mountain. And so Elijah sets this up, and he knows that this showdown is going to reveal once and for all to these indifferent, waffling people who the one true God really is. Okay, so when I read this, it's so easy when you go through the Old Testament just to kind of read through it and go, yeah. Picture what happens in this. I hesitate to say story, because it's a story, but it's historical. So picture in your mind this stuff as we read it. Then Elijah said to them, verse 22, "I am the only prophet of the Lord who is left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Now bring 2 bulls. The prophets of Baal may choose whichever one they wish, and cut it into pieces and lay it on the wood of their altar, but without setting fire to it." Okay, so gross already, right? "Then call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by setting fire to the wood is the one true God." And all the people agreed. The people were like, yeah, whatever, we'll see what's up. And then Elijah says, we're going to have one of the gods is going to rain fire down from heaven. The people are like, hey, yeah, we're in. They went from this to, let's see what happens. All right? And their posture changes one more time. We'll see. So, of course, they agreed. They want a show. It's human nature. We're entertained. So here we go. Again, Elijah's giving Baal every opportunity, home field, 850 to 1, the God of rain. All the God of rain has to do is fire a lightning bolt down on this altar, and he wins. Elijah's making it as easy as possible for Baal. But Elijah's confident. He's doing what God told him to do. He believes God's going to come through. He believes God's going to reveal His power and His glory and draw people back, His own people back to Himself. And if you read back in Elijah's life, what Elijah learned in his solitude and the bread and water experience of the caves and the mountains is that he could trust God in no matter what the circumstances. He could trust God to come through no matter how overwhelming the odds seemed to be. He knew he could trust God. Do we know that? Have you experienced that? Some of us in the room have experienced that. We've been in dire circumstances, felt alone, if not abandoned, unable to see what's coming, only looking behind and saying, if What lies behind lies ahead. I'm in deep trouble. We've faced overwhelming odds and difficult circumstances, and God's come through for us. Right? Elijah knows that God can do this. So I love Elijah. Elijah has a little bit of playfulness in him, and we'll see that here. So Elijah says to the prophets of Baal, you guys go first, for there are many of you. There's 450 of them, plus the 400 of Asherah. So choose one of the bulls, gives them choice, whichever one you guys want. Choose one of the bulls and prepare it and call in the name of your God. But do not set fire to the wood, because that would be cheating. So they prepared one of the bulls, they placed it on the altar, then they called on the name of Baal all morning, shouting, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no reply of any kind. Then they danced wildly around the altar they had made, shouting, "O Baal, answer us." Thinking the wilder they got, the more worked up they got, the easier it might be for them, or there might be some hope that they could get Baal's attention and he would respond. Elijah, however, is getting bored. Verse 27, about noontime, Elijah began mocking them. "You'll have to shout louder," he scoffed, "for surely he's a god. Perhaps he's deep in thought," or my favorite, and it's right in the Bible, "or relieving himself." I love that that's there, right? That's a holy man of God saying, maybe he's on the toilet, you know? Or maybe he's away on a trip, or he's asleep and needs to be wakened. And the guys are like, apparently they were all like, oh yeah, maybe he's right. So they shouted louder. And following their normal custom, they cut themselves with knives and swords until the blood gushed out. They raved all afternoon until the time of the evening sacrifice, but there was still no reply, no voice, no answer. This is craziness. And it would be hilarious if it wasn't so eternally tragic what was going on here. These prophets believed in Baal. I would argue and give evidence, probably even from Scripture, that it's always good when you say give evidence, probably even, right? It inspires confidence. These guys believed in Baal. They believed that Baal was real. They believed that Baal would come through. It's likely, let me go that way, it's likely that they had seen whatever it was. Could have been demonic, something in the spirit realm that they attributed to Baal, and so they had seen something that caused them to believe that Baal could come through. And they had worked themselves into a raving, bloodied frenzy, desperately trying to get the attention of their God, but yet there was no voice, no answer, no reply of any kind. So now it's Elijah's turn to call on his God. And there's quite the contrast between how the prophets of Baal approach their God and how Elijah approaches his. Then Elijah called to the people, "Come over here." And they all crowded around him as he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. He took 12 stones, one to represent each of the tribes of Israel, and he used the stones to rebuild the Lord's altar. Then he dug a trench around the altar large enough to hold about 3 gallons. He piled wood on the altar, cut the bull into pieces, gross, and laid the pieces on the wood. Then he said, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour the water over the offering and the wood." And after they had done this, he said, "Do the same thing again." And when they finished, he said, "Now do it a 3rd time." So they did as he said, and the water ran around the altar and even overflowed the trench. So it's soaking wet. There's no chance that Elijah has a buddy in the crowd that has a match, a flint or whatever, and he's going to throw a spark on the fire to consume it while everybody's looking skyward. If this thing's going to light up, it's going to be because God had something to do with it. And so the prophets of Baal had danced wildly. They cut themselves. They yelled louder in the event that their God was sitting in the bathroom reading Seattle Magazine. Elijah knows that God is listening. He knows he doesn't have to shout to get his attention. And it says this: at the customary time for offering the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet walked up to the altar and prayed, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all this at your command. O Lord, answer me." That's the only similarity. They both say, "O Lord, answer me," to their gods. "Answer me so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God and that you have brought them back to yourself." Immediately, not at noontime, not at the end of the day, immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the ditch. And when the people saw it, they fell on their faces and cried out, "The Lord is God, the Lord is God." They better have done that, right? So here's the people. Yeah, whatever. We'll see. We'll choose. We'll waffle. Oh, we're going to have a showdown? We're going to get entertained? Cool. We're a little more interested. Then fire actually comes down from heaven and burns up this soaking wet altar, and all the water. Their only response was to do this, to fall flat on their faces and worship and cry out, "The Lord is God, the Lord is God," effectively surrendering their lives again to the God of Israel. So now, verse 40, Elijah commands, "Seize all the prophets of Baal. Don't let a single one escape." So the people seized them all. So the people now they've turned totally around. They seized these prophets, and Elijah took them down to the Kishon Valley and killed them there. 850 deaths. The people have turned back to God. In the next few verses, Elijah prays for rain, and the first rain clouds that the country has seen in roughly 3 years start to form on the horizon and make their way. What a powerful experience. A mountaintop, a literal mountaintop experience, right? Where God rains fire down from heaven, Elijah wins the day, the people have turned back to God. This is a defining moment. It's certainly a defining moment. This is where we wrap the story up. We put a nice bow on it, and we talk about how God will rain fire down in your life when you need him to, right? No, it's not over. When Ahab got home, 19 verse 1, he told Jezebel what Elijah had done and that he had slaughtered the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah: "May the gods also kill me if by this time tomorrow I have failed to take your life like those whom you killed." So at first glance, you read this and you go, big deal. What is she going to do? Does she not hear what happened? So imagine you're Ahab. You come back from this showdown on Mount Carmel, and you've got to break the news to your wife. "Hey, honey, I'm home. How was your day?" "Oh, fine. How was your day?" "Well, there was a showdown on Mount Carmel, and it was pretty cool. Fire from heaven, from God, and the people all turned to worship God, and Elijah had all your prophets killed in the Kishon Valley. So what's for dinner? You want to stay in? You want to go out? What do you want to do?" So what could this Phoenician princess, this polytheistic pagan queen, do to Elijah now? What could she possibly do to him? You know what she could do? She could make him run for his life. And that's exactly what he did. Elijah was afraid, verse 3, and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the desert, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Elijah runs for his life out of fear, as if God had abandoned him, as if God wasn't real, as if God hadn't just done this thing on Mount Carmel. And it doesn't make sense that Elijah runs when you look at it. But it does, because he's human, just like you and me. He does the very thing you and I have done, what I will probably do again. He runs in times of trouble. He goes out into the desert. He's depressed. He's breaking under the stress of his role as a prophet, from living on bread and water in the mountains. He's afraid of Jezebel, and he sees himself as a failure, and death is looking like a good solution for him. We can relate, right? I can relate. We just never know when life is going to change. As much as we try to control and manage the things of our lives, we can't control and manage life. We can't control and manage the things that come at us, things that God allows to come at us in life. So a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago Friday, I was riding my bike, which is something that I like to do. And even when it gets wet and cold, I still like to ride my bike. My friends are saying, "Todd, why don't you just get a membership at 24 Hour Fitness and ride a bike there?" I'm like, well, 2 reasons. It costs more, and a stationary bike stinks, man. I don't want to sit in a stationary bike and look at a TV screen or out through a window at a parking lot. I want to be on my bike cruising around Woodinville. So I was doing that 2 Fridays ago, and I was getting really impressed with myself because I'm expanding my route and riding more miles and doing a lot of hills in Woodinville. And so I added 2 more miles onto my ride. And the fun part of this ride is a road called Wildflower that everybody in Woodinville knows of. If you've ever been to Woodinville, if you go up from the wineries, a lot of people know where the wineries are. The highest hill in Woodinville there is Hollywood Hill, and there's a pipeline that runs across there and at the top. So I ride up to the pipeline and then I come down. So Wildflower is this windy hill that on a good day, on a dry day, you probably could take this hill at like 40 miles an hour. This was not a dry day, so I had my hands on the brakes and I was 25, 30 miles an hour, enough to have fun. And a little small pickup truck turned out and started coming towards me, and I made my way kind of towards my white line just to make room for him. No danger, just making room, being polite. And it's wet, and there was oil on the road where I went, and wetness and oil and rubber tires didn't go together very well. So my bike went whoop, and I hit the pavement, and I don't remember hitting the pavement. I remember sliding across the asphalt with my face just above it, and this hand just taking the brunt of, and my clothes, taking the brunt of the asphalt. And it's amazing what you think about when that's happening to you. It's happening like this, and you're thinking in slow motion, like, this is not good. This could be bad. How long am I going to be in the hospital? What have I just broken? Jean's going to have to speak on Sunday. What are we going to do? It's Friday. Who's going to call my wife? And so I got this awesome bruise that I really want to show you, but this would be my last Sunday if I did that. So the guy in the truck who watched it, he thought I was dead. He got out of the truck, he's on 911, and he's like, he's breathing. And I'm like, I'm awake, I'm talking. And then this mother came up, young mom, she came up to me. And I'm not even sure if she saw it, but she just looked at me and started freaking out. She's like, oh my God, oh my God. And I said, do I have a bone sticking out of me somewhere that I'm not aware of because you're freaking me out? And she said, no, but your sense of humor is still intact. I'm like, well, that's good. As I'm laying here and my clothes are all ripped up and you're just staring at me. So I'm laying on the cold ground and I hear this voice behind me who came out of his house, and he was so concerned. He said, I hope he learned his lesson. And I remember thinking, you know what? I'm not sure what's broken and what's happening, but that guy's a jamoke, which is the Greek word for, no, it's not. It's a Chicago word that I won't tell you what it's for. But so I didn't give him much thought. So the ambulance comes and I get up and I'm able to move. And then the guy is still there. He's reveling in my misfortune, but he's curious, right? So he then directs his comment to me. He looks at me and he says, I hope you learned your lesson. And I to be honest, I answered like Jesus would. I said, you know what, sir? I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm right here if you want to have that conversation. The adrenaline was pumping. And I've been thinking about that guy. I'm going to take him some Krispy Kreme and a note that says, if you were bleeding in my street, I would care. Probably. But I've been thinking about his question. Have you learned your lesson? Did you learn your lesson? And the takeaway that I have, truthfully, 2 weeks after this event is that what I learned is that life can change like that. 1 minute you're cruising down a hill, the wind is blowing in your face, you're listening to music, you're thinking about work, you're thinking about your family, you're thinking about what you're going to do next, and then the next second you are sliding across the pavement, and none of that stuff matters in that moment. That's kind of what happened to Elijah here. The wheels have just come out from under him, and he's lost himself. And when that happens to us, when the wheels come out from under us, we lose our sense of security, we lose our sense of balance. And very often when we lose our sense of security, we lose our sense of balance, we retreat. And when we retreat from God. And when we retreat from God, we forget what God has done. Maybe we don't forget what he's done, we just don't think he's going to do it again. We don't trust him to do it again. We very quickly give up hope that he will come through for us in this situation when the wheels have come out from under us, as he has in others. And we get angry, we get fearful, we get anxious, we get depressed. Sometimes we feel like we've failed, like we've let ourselves down, our families down, we've let God down, and we consider giving up. We consider giving up on whatever the circumstance is. We consider giving up on each other. We consider giving up on God, and at times we consider giving up on life itself. And that's where Elijah is at. He is ready to die. In fact, he asked God to take his life. Then he lay down, 19 verse 5, then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. He looked around and saw some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He's back to bread and water again. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more, for there is a long journey ahead of you. So he got up and ate and drank. And the food gave him enough strength to travel for 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. There he came to a cave where he spent the night. So now here's Elijah. He's off the grid. He's definitely not in the place that God sent him, but God is trying to redirect him. Elijah hasn't really thought that much about God since, at least that we can tell, since getting the message from Jezebel. Yet God deals with Elijah just how he deals with you and I when we retreat, when we run in fear, when we find ourselves overcome by anxiety, depression, uncertainty, despair. Fill in your own blank. He treats us with mercy. He provides our needs. And that's exactly what he does. He provides Elijah's immediate needs by giving him food and water. And he provides Elijah comfort by sending an angel to give him that food and water. And then God allows Elijah to take a 40-day journey. And sometimes we have to journey. Sometimes, even when God is directing our lives, it seems like he's not. We're uncertain about where we're going. We're uncertain about how things are going to work out. But we need the journey to get us to the point when God is ready to say what he's going to say to us, we can hear him, recognize his voice, and respond to him. So God takes Elijah on this 40-day journey, a journey that should have only taken 14 days from where he is. Elijah needed the extra 26 days to wander in the desert so that he'd be ready to hear from God. And he takes this 40-day journey in the same desert that Moses and the people of Israel took a 40-year journey through before God took Moses to the same mountain and revealed himself to Moses. And when Elijah gets to Mount Sinai, God asks him a question that he already knew the answer to. The Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah? How did you get here? Why are you here?" He was there because he was afraid. He was there because he was depressed. He was there because he let go of God. He was there because that great experience he had on Mount Carmel wasn't enough for him to cling to God when Jezebel said, "May I be dead tomorrow if I haven't killed you by this time," right? So instead of saying, "You know what, God, I got here because I blew it. I'm sorry. Forgive me," he doesn't do that. Elijah's like, "You know how I got here?" And he starts complaining. Elijah replied, "I've zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I alone am left. Now they're trying to kill me too." Dude, did you forget what just happened? You killed all the prophets of Baal and Asherah. They're dead. It's like that event never took place in Elijah's life. He's only seeing the despair, the fear, the threat. And then God says, verse 11, "Go out and stand before me on the mountain." And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Other translations say that the gentle whisper was a sheer silence, a thin silence, a still small voice. Elijah didn't discover God in the powerful, mighty stuff. He found God in the sheer silence through a still small voice speaking to him in a gentle whisper. When Elijah he heard that gentle whisper and realized it was God, he came out of the cave. He wrapped his face in his cloak and came out of the cave. That is the defining moment in Elijah's life, when he heard God in the gentle whisper, in that sheer silence. And God, in his graciousness and his love and his purpose for Elijah's life, starts to lead Elijah back. Even though Elijah complains for a little while longer, if you read the story, he starts to lead Elijah back to the place where he's supposed to be. And as we leave this place today, we head off into our lives. A lot of times we talk about, especially people that have been around the church for a long time, we talk about longing for the mountaintop experiences, whatever that is in our lives. I want to have that powerful, Mount Carmel experience where it's so evident that God's real and that I can trust him, and I need that experience to buoy my faith. And those, we think, are defining moments, and they can be, and sometimes they are. They're just not, they're few and far between, those Mount Carmel moments, those mountaintop moments. If you read Oswald Chambers, Oswald says that our journey with Jesus isn't lived on the mountaintops, it's lived in the valleys in between. That's where life happens. And the valleys of real life are hard, they're challenging, and they're filled with adversity, uncertainty, and pain. And in those valleys, our lives will get hit by hurricane force winds that threaten our willingness and our ability to trust God to see us through. It's in those valleys that the 9.7 magnitude earthquakes will come and rock our world and rock our faith to its very core, presenting a challenge to our ability and willingness to trust God to see us through. Raging fires will come in our lives, and they will scorch the very things that we have put our sense of safety and security into, leaving only God to trust. And it will challenge our ability to trust God fully. And we've all been there. And if you haven't been there, it just means you're young, you know? Yet it's in those conditions, when those things hit our lives, it's easy for us to end up like Elijah. It's easy for us to run. It's easy for us to retreat. It's easy for us to fall into depression and despair. It's easy for us to want to give up. But it's in the midst of the wind, it's in the midst of the earthquakes, it's in the midst of the scorching fires that we can truly discover the defining moments in our lives, and as a church, for that matter. Our defining moments, our real defining moments, are discovered in the valleys, when in the midst of whatever we're facing, the gentle whisper of God comes to us in a still small voice through a sheer silence. And I wonder, can you hear that voice? I'm asking myself this week, can I hear it? When the still small voice comes in a gentle whisper through a thin silence, can I hear it? Or is there too much noise in my life? Is there too much busyness? Am I trying too hard to manage my own life on my own terms? Because if that's true, then I can't. And when it's true, then I don't hear the voice. I can't hear it. And if I hear it, I can't recognize that it's God who's speaking. I find myself, I was telling somebody after first service, I find myself longing for just alone time with God. And I'm missing that because I'm a journaler. I need that time to sit with God and take the time to write the stuff that's going on in my life and my prayers. And it's not happening as much as I'd like. And when that's true, then the answer for me to this question, can I hear it, is not so much. Yet it's in that sacred space, that quietness, that wherever it is in the valleys of our life, when God comes to us and speaks our name, calls to us in his gentle whisper, in that still small voice that comes through a sheer silence, invites us like he did Elijah to kind of step back towards him, move in his direction so that he can take us and put us back on the path we were meant to be on. Can we hear that voice? Do we want to hear that voice? Do we want to be in a place where we can not only hear the voice, but recognize that it's God calling us and respond to him so he can take us back towards himself, towards his purpose? We're going to sing a song here in a minute that is really, I'm not going to set it up too much except to say, use this as a song of prayer. And consider how true or untrue this song is in your life. And just take the words that somebody else wrote, borrow them, make them your own, and see what God does with it. Paul. There are a couple lines in that song I think that apply to all of us. One is hearing the whisper, "Child, lift up your head. I'm not done with you yet." Can you hear that whisper? And then the other one is shaking off the chains. How many of us need to shake the chains off that we carry around with us that we don't need to carry? Because Jesus has already taken them. And then we're redeemed, right? I hope that song is true in your life. If it's not true, if that's a song that you wish were true, then I'm going to hang out right here and we can talk about that. If you want to know more about what a relationship with Jesus is like and what it's about, then I'm going to hang and we can talk. Everybody else, as you go this week, go knowing this: the God that pursues you with relentlessly tender love constantly calls to you and to me with a gentle whisper, a still small voice, and it comes to us in a sheer, thin silence. As you go this week, as you leave here, know that God pursues you, that voice is calling your name. Ask God to help you to hear it, to identify that it's him, and to respond however you need to. That's my prayer for myself this week. It's my prayer for all of us. Have a great week. See you next Sunday.